The rain had been falling for 3 days straight, a relentless, weeping gray that matched the mood inside our quiet suburban home. I sat at the kitchen island, nursing a lukewarm cup of tea, watching my husband, Mark, meticulously organize his collection of vintage vinyl. He was a man of routines and quiet passions, and had always found a deep comfort in his predictability. Our life together was a calm, steady river, built over 10 years of shared laughter, quiet support, and what I believed was an unshakable trust. He hummed along to a crackling jazz record, a soft, contented sound that usually made me smile. Today, it felt different. It felt like the stillness in the air before a lightning strike. "You're quiet today, Clara," he said, not looking up from a worn sleeve of a Miles Davis album. His voice was warm, the familiar baritone that had first drawn me in. "Everything okay?" "Just thinking," I replied, forcing a smile. "About the attic. We've been putting off that clean out for years. With the holidays coming up, maybe it's time we finally tackled it. We could donate so much of that old stuff." Mark finally looked up, his brow furrowed slightly. "The attic? Now? It's a mess up there, honey. Dust bunnies the size of small dogs." He gave a little chuckle, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Can't it wait?" "I just feel like we need a fresh start, a clearing out of the old," I insisted, a strange urgency rising in my chest that I couldn't explain. I thought of my older sister, Isabel. We hadn't spoken in nearly 5 years, not since a bitter, unresolved argument that had cleaved our family in two. She was the old I was subconsciously trying to purge. The unspoken rift between us was a constant low-grade ache, a topic Mark and I rarely breached. He'd always said it was for the best, that Isabel was a chaotic force, and I was better off without her drama. I had, over time, come to believe him. All right, he conceded, sliding the record into its jacket with practiced care. "If it'll make you happy, you can get started this weekend. I've got that conference call on Saturday, but I'll help you with the heavy boxes when I'm done." He walked over and kissed the top of my head. His lips were warm, his touch familiar. Yet for the first time in our marriage, a chill traced its way down my spine. It was a premonition, a whisper from a part of my soul that knew the calm river was about to become a raging flood. I watched him walk back to his records, a handsome, reliable man that was the center of my world, and I felt a profound and inexplicable sense of dread, as if I were already mourning the loss of the man I saw standing before me. The decision was made. This weekend, I would face the dust and shadows of the past, never suspecting that the darkest shadows were not in the attic, but living right here in my house. Saturday arrived with the weak, watery sun that did little to lift the oppressive humidity. True to his word, Mark sequestered himself in his home office for his conference call, the muffled sound of his professional voice a distant drone. Armed with rubber gloves, a flashlight, and a stack of empty cardboard boxes, I pulled down the folding stairs to the attic. The air that rushed down to greet me was thick and heavy, a potent cocktail of ancient dust, cedar planks, and forgotten time. I paused on the ladder, a wave of nostalgia washing over me. This was the attic of my husband's house, the one he'd owned before we met, a space filled with the ghosts of a life I wasn't part of. I hoisted myself up into the gloom. Motes of dust danced like frantic fairies in the beam of my flashlight. The space was cavernous, packed with the detritus of a life half-lived. There were his college textbooks, boxes of old clothes, a sad-looking artificial Christmas tree, and stacks of his parents' belongings they'd asked him to store. I started methodically, sorting items into keep, donate, and trash. It was mindless, strangely therapeutic work. Hours passed in a dusty haze. I found his high school yearbook and laughed at his lanky, awkward photo. I found a box of his childhood drawings and felt a pang of affection for the little boy who had become my husband. It was tucked away in the farthest, darkest corner, behind a stack of his mother's old hat boxes, that I saw it. It wasn't a cardboard box like the others. It was a metal lockbox, about the size of a shoebox. dark and ornate, with tarnished brass fittings and an intricate floral-patterned engraving on the lid. It was completely out of place amongst the dusty relics of his suburban upbringing. It looked ancient, secretive. I ran my gloved finger over the cold metal, my curiosity piqued. There was a heavy, old-fashioned lock on the front and no key in sight. I tried to jiggle it, but it was sealed tight. I felt a thrill of discovery, like a child finding a pirate's treasure chest. My first thought was to call out to Mark, to share this exciting find with him. It was probably just old family documents or something equally mundane, but the mystery was enchanting. I imagined us opening it together, poring over its contents, another small adventure in our shared life. I picked it up. It was heavier than it looked, weighted with more than just years of neglect. I carried it carefully over to the attic stairs, my mind buzzing with possibilities. What secrets could this beautiful, forgotten box possibly hold? The innocent question echoed in the silent, dusty air, a prelude to an answer that would shatter my world. I descended the ladder, clutching the box to my chest, completely unaware that I was carrying the source of my own devastation. I placed the lockbox on the kitchen island, the metal cool against the warm granite countertop. I was wiping the dust from its surface with a damp paper towel when I heard the door to the office click open. Mark emerged, stretching his arms over his head and letting out a deep sigh. "That call went on forever," he said, rubbing his eyes. "How's the great attic purge going? Did you find any hidden treasures?" He smiled, a tired but easy grin, and started walking towards the refrigerator. "I think I might have," I said, my voice bright with excitement. "Look at this." He turned and his eyes fell on the box. The change was instantaneous and terrifying. The easy smile vanished, replaced by a rigid mask of what? Fear? No, it was more than that. It was pure, unadulterated panic. His face went pale, his eyes wide and fixed on the box as if it were a venomous snake coiled on our counter. The air in the room grew thick and cold. "Where did you get that?" he asked, his voice low and strained, stripped of all its usual warmth. It was the voice of a stranger. "In the attic?" I said, my own smile faltering. I took a step back, instinctively creating space between us. It was tucked away in the back corner. It's locked, but isn't it beautiful? I thought we could try to find the key and... No. The word was a gunshot in the quiet room. He crossed the space between us in 2 long strides, his movements sharp and aggressive. "We're not opening it." "Mark, what's wrong? It's just an old box," I said, my heart starting to pound against my ribs. The dread from the other day was back, amplified, screaming at me. "It's nothing," he hissed, his eyes darting from the box to my face and back again. "It's garbage, old junk. It needs to be thrown out." He reached for it, but I instinctively put my hand on the lid to stop him. "Mark, you're scaring me." And then he did something he had never, ever done in our 10 years together. He grabbed my arm. His fingers dug into my flesh, his grip surprisingly strong, almost violent. "Clara," he said, his voice a guttural command, "throw it out. It's nothing. Do you understand me? It is nothing." I stared at him, speechless. The man holding my arm was not my husband. My Mark was gentle, patient, and kind. This man was a cornered animal, his eyes filled with a desperate, wild terror I had never seen before. The shock was so profound, it felt like a physical blow. I slowly pulled my arm from his grasp, his fingerprints already blooming into red marks on my skin. He seemed to realize what he'd done, and the mask of panic was quickly replaced by a flimsy facade of regret. "Clara, honey, I'm sorry," he stammered, his hands held up in a placating gesture. "It's just, that box holds some bad memories, from a long time ago, things I'd rather forget." But the lie was as transparent as glass. It wasn't about bad memories, it was about a secret so enormous that the mere sight of its container could transform my loving husband
into a frightening stranger. I nodded slowly, my mind numb. "Okay, Mark," I whispered. "Okay." He watched me, his chest rising and falling rapidly, as I picked up the box and carried it towards the garage. But I didn't throw it out. I placed it gently on a shelf behind the lawnmower, my hands shaking. That night, I knew I wouldn't be sleeping. I would be waiting, and I would be opening that box. The question of what was inside was no longer a curious fancy. It had become a terrifying necessity.
The house was cloaked in an unnerving silence. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the refrigerator seemed amplified in the tense darkness. Mark had gone to bed hours ago, feigning exhaustion, but I knew he was only pretending to sleep. I could feel his unease radiating from the closed bedroom door. I sat in the living room sofa, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the wall. My arm still throbbed where he'd grabbed me, a physical reminder of the chasm that had just opened in our marriage. His violent reaction had replayed in my mind 1,000 times, each viewing more chilling than the last. The gentle, predictable man I loved had been a facade. But a facade for what? Around 2 a.m., when I was certain he was finally, deeply asleep, I slipped out of the house and into the cool, damp air of the garage. My flashlight cut a nervous path through the shadows, landing on the ornate metal box sitting on the shelf. It seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy in the darkness. I brought it back inside, setting it on the dining room table, the one we used for holiday dinners and family celebrations. The irony was not lost on me. My hands trembled as I examined the lock. It was old, a simple, warded lock, but I had no key. Panic began to bubble in my throat. What if I couldn't get it open? The thought of never knowing was more terrifying than any truth it could possibly contain. Then I remembered the toolbox in the laundry room. I tiptoed in and retrieved a small flathead screwdriver and a pair of needle-nose pliers. I was no locksmith, but a lifetime of watching crime dramas and the surge of desperate adrenaline made me feel capable of anything. I returned to the table, my heart hammering against my ribs. I inserted the tip of the screwdriver into the keyhole, feeling for the internal wards. I twisted and jiggled, guided by nothing but instinct and raw determination. The metal scraped and groaned in protest. Sweat beaded on my forehead. For a moment, I thought it was hopeless. I was about to give up, to resort to smashing it with a hammer, when I felt a faint click. I held my breath, my entire body rigid. I slowly turned the screwdriver again, and this time I heard it, a loud, definitive clack as the locking mechanism gave way. The sound echoed in the silent house like a death knell. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely lift the lid. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the cold metal. This was it, the point of no return. A part of me screamed to stop, to put the box back in the garage, to pretend this night never happened, and to cling to the comfortable lie of my life. But the woman whose husband had grabbed her in fear and anger, the woman who now saw a stranger sleeping in her bed, had to know. I had to know what was worth protecting with such desperate violence. Taking a deep, ragged breath that felt like my last as the person I used to be, I slowly, deliberately lifted the lid of the box. The air inside smelled faintly of dried roses and old paper, the perfume of a buried life. And what I saw first, lying on a bed of yellowed lace, made the air rush from my lungs. It was a photograph, a professional wedding portrait of my husband, Mark, smiling ecstatically, and standing beside him in a white wedding gown was my sister, Isabel. I couldn't breathe. The air in my lungs turned to glass, sharp and suffocating. My vision tunneled, the edges blurring to gray, until the only thing in focus was the photograph. Mark and Isabel, not just together, but married. His arm was wrapped possessively around her waist, his face alight with the kind of radiant joy I had never seen on him, not even on our own wedding day. And Isabel? She was looking at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated adoration. It was a portrait of two people completely and utterly in love. The world tilted on its axis, and I had to grip the edge of the table to keep from collapsing. My trembling hands reached back into the box, as if compelled by some morbid force. Beneath the photograph was a bundle of letters, tied with the faded blue ribbon. I untied it, my fingers numb and clumsy. The handwriting was Mark's. I recognized his elegant, sloping script instantly. The letters were addressed to my Izzy. I unfolded the top one. The words swam before my eyes, a torrent of passion and promises. My dearest Izzy, not a moment goes by that I don't think of you. Marrying you was the beginning of my life, not just a new chapter. You are the air I breathe, the only woman I will ever truly love. Forever and always, your Mark. The date was from 12 years ago, just 1 year before I met him. I dropped the letter as if it had burned my skin. Forever and always. The words were a venomous echo of the vows he had spoken to me. Every I love you, every tender moment, every promise of our future together curdled into a grotesque lie. Underneath the letters was more evidence of their shared life. There was a dried, brittle rose, its petals the color of old blood. There was a lock of blonde hair, Isabel's hair, tied with a piece of string. And at the very bottom, tucked into a velvet sleeve, was the official marriage certificate from the state of Nevada, dated 12 years ago. Mark Robert Peterson and Isabel Ann Davis, husband and wife. A wave of nausea washed over me, and I stumbled to the sink, retching, but nothing came up. My entire 10-year marriage wasn't just a lie, it was a ghost story. I was the unwitting second wife, living in the shadow of a love and a marriage he had simply erased. And Isabel, my own sister? The bitter fight we'd had 5 years ago, the one that had estranged us, suddenly snapped into sharp, horrifying focus. I had accused her of being selfish and reckless after she'd abruptly moved away without a word. She had sneered at me, calling me a naive little fool who didn't know anything about the real world. At the time, I thought she was just being cruel. Now, I understood. She wasn't just being cruel, she was gloating. They had both been lying to me every single day for a decade. Every family gathering they both attended, every polite, stilted conversation was a charade. Their shared secret was a private joke at my expense. The underappreciated, good-hearted Clara, so easy to fool. I slid to the cold kitchen floor, the marriage certificate clutched in my hand. The shaking had stopped, replaced by an arctic coldness that spread from my chest through my entire body. The grief was still there, a massive, gaping wound, but something else was being born in its place. A cold, hard, crystalline rage. They had built their lives on the ashes of my trust, and I knew, with a certainty that burned brighter than any love I had ever felt, that I was going to be the one to burn their world to the ground. The sun rose, casting long, accusatory shadows across the kitchen floor where I still sat. I hadn't moved. The initial shock had receded, leaving behind a landscape of ruin inside my head. But amidst the rubble of my shattered life, a single clear thought began to form. I would not be a silent victim. I would not cry in my room while Mark offered hollow apologies. I would not allow Isabel to watch from a distance, smirking at the chaos she helped create. They had humiliated me in private for 10 years. I would expose them in public. My pain demanded an audience. Their betrayal deserved a stage. I slowly got to my feet, my joints aching, my body feeling ancient. I walked back to the dining room table and looked at the contents of the box, now spread out like a coroner's report. These were not just relics of a dead love. They were my weapons.
I carefully gathered every piece, the photograph, the gushing letters, the lock of hair, the marriage certificate, and placed them back inside the ornate box. I closed the lid, the soft click sealing their fate. My mind, now sharp and methodical, began to work. A simple confrontation wouldn't be enough. I needed a venue, a place where the fallout would be absolute and inescapable. And then it came to me. A perfect, terrible idea. My parents' 40th wedding anniversary party was in 2 weeks. It was a huge affair, a catered event at a beautiful local restaurant. Everyone would be there: aunts, uncles, cousins, old family friends, and of course, the guests of honor. Mark, my devoted husband, would be by my side. And Isabel, who had recently made a tentative peace with our parents and RSVP'd yes, would be there too. She was planning to attend, to stand in the same room as me and her ex-husband, a living testament to their shared, sickening secret. It was the perfect stage. I spent the next 2 weeks living a lie of my own. It was the most difficult performance of my life. I was a gracious, loving wife to Mark. I smiled when he kissed me. I made his coffee the way he liked it. I listened to him talk about his day. He was relieved, believing his flimsy explanation and brief flash of anger had worked, that I had thrown the box away and forgotten about it. He saw my compliance as weakness, my quietness as acceptance. He'd had no idea he was living with a ghost. I was a shell, and inside, I was meticulously planning his demise. I called the restaurant to confirm a detail with the event manager. Yes, there would be a microphone and a projector for the celebratory toast and slideshow our family had prepared for my parents. On the morning of the party, as I was getting ready, Mark came into the bedroom. He was dressed in a sharp new suit. "You look beautiful, Clara," he said, smiling at my reflection in the mirror. I was wearing a simple, elegant red dress, a fighting color. "Ready for the big night?" he asked. I looked at him, at this man who was a complete stranger to me, and I gave him the most brilliant, genuine-looking smile I could muster. "I can't wait," I said, my voice sweet as honey, my heart as cold and hard as a diamond. "I have a feeling it's going to be a night that none of us will ever forget." I picked up my clutch, the heavy metal box hidden carefully inside a larger gift bag, and walked out the door, leaving him to follow. The restaurant was buzzing with warmth and laughter, a stark contrast to the icy resolve that filled my chest. Chandeliers cast a golden glow over tables adorned with white linens and roses. Family and friends embraced, their voices a happy chorus, celebrating my parents' 4 decades of love, a love built on honesty and respect. Everything mine was not. I moved through the room like an actress on a stage, accepting hugs, smiling, and making small talk. Mark was by my side, his hand resting proprietarily on the small of my back. He was the picture of the doting husband. Every time his skin touched mine, I had to fight the urge to recoil. Isabel arrived late, making a dramatic entrance, as always. She wore a slinky silver dress that clung to her body, her blonde hair perfectly styled. She scanned the room, her eyes briefly meeting mine with the flicker of something I now recognized as smug condescension. She air-kissed our parents and then glided over to our table. "Clara," she said, her voice dripping with false sincerity, "you look nice." Mark tensed beside me, a barely perceptible shift. I saw the quick shared glance between them, a spark of shared history and secrets passing in an instant. "It's so good you could make it, Isabel," I replied, my voice dangerously even. "Family is just so important, isn't it?" The evening wore on. Toasts were made, stories were shared, and a slideshow of my parents' life together played on the large screen at the front of the room. Finally, it was our turn. Mark stood up, glass in hand. "I'd like to propose a toast," he began, his voice resonating through the room. "To my wonderful in-laws, Frank and Ellen. And also," he paused, turning to look directly at me, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "To my wife, Clara, who has taught me so much over the years." The room fell silent, waiting. She's taught me what true patience is, and more importantly, she's taught me what I don't want in a partner. A collective gasp swept through the room. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father started to rise from his seat, his face turning purple with rage. But I just smiled, a slow, knowing smile. This was it. This was the cue I had been waiting for. "Thank you, Mark," I said, my voice ringing out clearly in the stunned silence as I stood. "That's the most honest thing you've said to me in 10 years. And since we're on the subject of honesty and learning, I have a little something to share as well." I walked to the front of the room, carrying the gift bag. I placed the ornate lockbox on the podium. The microphone screeched slightly as I adjusted it. Mark is right. We have learned a lot from each other. For example, I learned that my husband, the man I have loved and trusted for a decade, was already married when he met me. I opened the box. I held up the wedding portrait for all to see. He was married to my sister, Isabel. The room erupted in frantic whispers. I saw Isabel's face drain of all color, her mask of cool confidence shattering into a million pieces. Mark was frozen, his face a grotesque tableau of shock and terror. "They never divorced," I continued, my voice gaining strength with every word. I held up the marriage certificate. "They just buried it, along with their love letters, in which my husband promised my sister she was the only woman he would ever truly love. They kept the secret together. Every holiday, every birthday, every time they were in the same room, they were lying. To me, to our parents, to all of you." I turned my gaze from the horrified faces of my family to the two people who had destroyed my life. Mark was stammering, trying to form words, but no sound came out. Isabel was shaking her head, tears of humiliation, not remorse, streaming down her face. "So, I'd like to propose a toast of my own," I said, raising an imaginary glass. "To secrets and lies, and to the truth, because it always, always comes out." The beautiful party dissolved into chaos. My words hung in the air, an indictment from which there was no escape. My father, a man of few words and immense integrity, strode directly to Mark. He didn't yell. He didn't make a scene. He simply looked him in the eye and said, in a low, trembling voice, "Get out. Get out of my sight and never come near my family again." The quiet authority in his voice was more devastating than any shout. Mark, utterly broken and exposed, stumbled out of the restaurant without a single backward glance. My mother, her face a mask of grief and fury, walked over to Isabel, who was now sobbing hysterically, surrounded by the shocked and disgusted stares of our relatives. "How could you?" my mother whispered, the pain in her voice cutting through the noise. "She is your sister, your only sister." Isabel couldn't answer. She was a pariah, the architect of her own public disgrace. She too fled, her silver dress a shimmering beacon of her shame as she pushed through the stunned guests. In the ensuing silence, I stood alone at the podium, the box of lies open before me. I felt strangely calm, emptied of the rage and pain that had been my constant companions for 2 weeks. It was over. The poison was out. My family slowly surrounded me, not with questions or pity, but with a silent, powerful wall of support. My father put his arm around my shoulders. My mother took my hand, her grip firm and reassuring. In their eyes, I saw not the reflection of a fool who had been deceived, but of a woman who had fought back with courage and dignity. That night, I didn't go back to the house I had shared with Mark. I stayed with my parents, sleeping in my childhood bed. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee and the sounds of a home built on real love. The world felt different. It was quieter, clearer. The constant low-grade hum of a lie I didn't even know I was hearing had finally stopped. I had lost a husband and a sister, but I had reclaimed myself. In the weeks that followed, I filed for an annulment on the grounds of bigamy. Mark and Isabel disappeared from our lives, disgraced and disowned, their shared secret now a public burden that would follow them forever. I packed up my belongings from that house, leaving behind the ghost of a marriage that never was. I didn't take much. I started over with a clean slate and an open heart, bruised but not broken. Sometimes I think about that ornate metal box. It was a tomb for a secret, designed to keep the past buried. But some things refuse to stay buried. The truth has a weight and a life of its own. They thought they could contain it, but they only succeeded in delaying the reckoning. I walked away from that fire not as a victim scorched by the flames, but as a survivor forged in them, stronger and freer than I had ever been before. And I found a profound, lasting peace in the simple, moralistic certainty that I was good, they were evil, and in the end, justice had been served.